This is WRUULP, Savannah, Georgia, 107.5 FM, WRUU.org. We are Savannah Soundings, community radio with global soul. You are listening to One Human Nation with your host, Sandy Batiste. This program will be talking about race and race relations in your community and nationally. Our goal is to be open, honest, and productive.
Welcome to the One Human Nation show. I'm your host, Sandy Batiste, and welcome back to another show where we talk about the touchy subject of race in a safe, honest, open, and productive environment. We do have a guest that's going to be calling into the show in about 15 minutes. And so in preparation for that, I am going to be sharing some insights to prepare for today's show. And as we get into that mindset of shifting and talking about race and race reconciliation, keeping in mind this show is all about having conversations about what does it take to become one human nation? What does it take to start moving through a process of reconciliation, healing, and justice? The viewpoints expressed in the following program are not necessarily those of WRUU, its license holder, or its staff. So when we talk about race and race reconciliation, I always want to refer you to the One Human Nation website. That's where there are typically tools that are posted to help as far as some of our guidelines, some of our concepts that we embrace as part of having a productive conversation. So you've heard me talk a lot about the iceberg, and that's posted at onehumannation.info. And that's a rendering, a concept that really gets into what is our subculture. If you picture an iceberg and what's below the ice, what's going on within ourselves internally and with other cultures that we have not, that we're not aware of. And so we have posted the other shows. Everything is up to date now. You can either go to WRUU.org and go to the schedule in Thursday and pick up the recordings there, or you can pick them up from the website onehumannation.info. As we talk about our stories, and this is where it gets to be difficult because we try to do this in a way that's non-judgmental. So when we talk about our stories, we want to always use our I voice, that it's something that we are conveying as our truth. So we can be honest and open about our truth. And so there's no judgment. That being said, you may hear something that is very emotional for you to hear. It's all about gauging your reactions and responses. So we encourage you, as we do through the One Human Race initiative, to take care of yourself. Try to stay engaged. The divine can be found in the tension. So this show, and I encourage you to also like the One Human Nation Facebook page, because this is where I'm going to try to, and I say try to, start posting each week what's going to be the topic of conversation. So you can make comments there. If you would like to participate in the show, the way to connect with me is at my story at onehumannation.info. So the topic we're going to start talking about, and really the speakers that have been on, the guests that have been on for the past couple of weeks, have really been sharing their point of view from an ethnocentric point of view. And so when you start thinking about the scale of where are we, or what group that you're involved in, or what situation you're in, is it with a group that's ethnocentric, which is typically the dominant culture, the white culture, and it has nothing to do about the numbers and how many people there are. It's, it may be that people of color are actually the majority group, but do they have the power? Do they have the influence to make the changes? So when we talk about ethnocentric and the culture in the United States, recognizing because of the history, this is why it's so important to know our history. And I've said it once, I'll say it a million times. It is our history. It's not a Black person history or white person history or Native American history, Asian American history. It's our history. So when you go back and you take a look at our history, it's how did we get to the point? How would any culture get to the point of thinking that their way was the best way, and that being of a specific color and the creation of race for power, that would be okay. That would be okay to enslave other people, to annihilate other people. And it's hard to get your head around. It's hard for me to get my head around. Well, how could anybody think that was okay to totally enslave other people and totally erase their identity and take their land and kill and rape and all of that stuff that we just think is horrible for human beings to do to each other. And part of it is the mindset of, well, that didn't happen to actual human beings, because if you had particular characteristics, you were not considered to be of the human race. You were considered to be less than, considered to be property. And so the guest that's going to be calling in today is really going to be talking about how they went from an ethnocentric point of view, how they grew up, and thinking of themselves in a particular way, and having very limited contact with other cultures, and having, for want of a better way to think of it, a very conservative religious upbringing, and how did that change as time went on? What did it take for that ethnocentric point of view to start transitioning? Because that's the question that I get asked a lot, especially when facilitating workshops on race reconciliation. And it's gotten, it gets to be kind of an uncomfortable question when you're asked that by someone that is white, because if you're a person of color, especially for me as an African American female, I really can't get my head around why you would ask me that question. It's like, well, Sandy, what can we do? What what should we do? What can I feel so helpless, and how can we move through reconciliation? I have no idea what to do. And typically my response is, and I don't mean this to be flip or unfeeling, my response is, if you have to ask the question, you're not far enough yet on your journey. That means you need to be curious. You need to do some more discovery. You need to learn more about other cultures and your internal culture, and to be brutally honest with yourself about what you're discovering. So sometimes it's a good idea to journal, and it's things that you may not think of as being important, things that you may think that, oh, well, I don't get it. I don't understand why this is going to be anything that I need to focus on, because I don't get it. So something, I'm not going to deal with it because it's too difficult. It creates too much tension. And so I'm going to just put it on the back burner. Well, we can't get through reconciliation if that's the response that everybody takes. We have to kind of look in the mirror, look beneath the surface, and go, okay, what is it that I'm bringing to the table? So it is a process. I wish I could tell you it was an easy process. I wish I can say to you that it doesn't require constant diligence. And it's on both sides of the fence. A friend of mine, that's how, when she first referred to it that way, it really struck me that this is not just a one-sided experience. Doesn't matter whether you're white, it doesn't matter whether you're a person of color, it doesn't matter whether you were initially born in this country, but if you're now residing in the United States, then you have to start looking at, well, what are the dynamics here? So one of the tools that I refer you to, and I'm going to refresh with you on this particular tool, is the implicit association test. And when we start thinking about diversity and inclusion, the implicit association test, it really is going to focus more than only on race, black and white. It's going to focus on other things that you may not think are having an impact, like religion or gender, disability, sexuality, even how you associate weapons and recognize who should have a weapon, or when they have a weapon, is this person going to be, is it really a weapon, or am I projecting my fear? And this seems to be an ongoing trend and something that we see with our law enforcement system. It's that constant, when there's a situation that arises and there's a horrific outcome, there is that response of, well, I was fearful for my life. And you have to wonder, it's like, okay, this person was running away from you, their back was to you, and how is that fearful for your life? So we really need to take a close look at, how are we projecting our fears into a situation that has the potential to cause someone else harm. So I encourage you to go to onehumannation.info, and there's a link there for you to take the implicit association test. And I've taken a couple of them. I'm going to be taking a couple of more, because it's not about a one-time thing that you just take the test and you go, okay, well, I'm okay. Or you take the test and you go, oh boy, this is worse than what I thought. There is no good or bad. It's about being aware and being conscious and being awake. So we want to focus today, as we prepare for the caller. I have posted on the One Human Nation website, as well as it's a little bit more visible on the Facebook page. So be sure to like the Facebook page, One Human Nation. And there is a graphic there that shows ethnocentric versus ethno-relative. And that's what we're going to be talking about today when the guest calls in. His stories are very much related to this whole concept of ethnocentric, and whether you have the power or not, or feel like you have the power, because I do hear it a lot. Well, Sandy, my great-grandparents were poor, they were poor Irish, or they were poor, and we didn't have anything. It was, and especially the generations that remember their parents or grandparents lived through the Depression, which my parents did. And they were like, well, Sandy, we were all poor. And that's true to a certain extent. Yes, we were all poor, but it was the perception that if you were poor, that's one thing. But if you were also black and poor, that was like horrible. That was like even worse. And it was done intentionally. It was done intentionally in this country to create a divide. So as we get prepared to think about ethnocentric, as you think about how we're socialized in this country, I do want you to be aware that, keep an open mind. So our caller is coming in, and we're going to go to break.
I can. Can you hear me? So I have shut it off on my end. Okay. Yep, I can hear you great. I guess as ready as I'm ever going to be, so, yeah. Okay. Yeah, so doing well. Today was Maddie's last day at St. James, so talk about, yeah. No worries. Yep. Shall I keep talking? Or... Yep. Okay. Good. Alright. Oh.
Okay, now.
Okay, can you hear me now?
I can hear you now.
Oh, Lord help. Okay.
That was a well-researched catchphrase.
Yeah, so now at least I know what the deal is of what's going on, I think.
All right.
So, yeah, they're still hearing music, and so I just kind of want to make sure that you got the disclaimer and everything I had emailed over to you.
The what email?
The disclaimer about what WRUU, recording the show and the use of the recording, that kind of stuff.
Yes, I'm sure it's here.
Well,
radio station. I, Christian Hall, am agreeing to be interviewed. Yes.
I just want to make sure, because if not, Sandy was getting ready to read it to you again.
Yeah. I know that we're in it.
Okay, so the music is getting ready to wind down, and so I'm going to get us transitioned. We're not going to be, we'll be going live on the air in a few minutes, but I won't shock and surprise you. Okay,
okay, yeah.
All right,
gotcha.
So let's see about making that happen.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, we are back with our guest. Christian, are you there?
I am, Sandy. Good to be here.
Okay, fabulous. Well, thank you for joining the One Human Nation show.
It's an honor, working with you in One Human Race back in Austin. It's great to hear that this kind of stuff is going on in Savannah, too.
That it continues, and you are part of the experience.
All right. Yeah.
All righty. So, I've been talking to the listeners about ethnocentric and in preparation for your stories that you're going to be sharing with us today. So let me start with kind of the basic question of, and we talked about this a little bit off the air, is your narrative. If someone had asked you, growing up, how you envisioned yourself, how you pictured yourself, how would you describe yourself as your first narrative?
So I think it's kind of that quintessential, American story with the the 80s white trash kind of flair to it.
So you're going to have to explain that one.
Yeah.
So there's now you said it, I didn't. So there's flair to the white trash. Is that what you're telling me? So explain that.
Yeah, so my family was transient, and we moved all over the place for the first 10 or 12 years of my life. Connecticut, New York, Virginia, West Virginia, Ohio, Tennessee, kind of following wherever my dad could get a job. And so we grew up mostly in rural areas, and actually lived in a couple of trailer parks all along the way. And finally, my dad landed a really good job with Eastman Chemical Company in Kingsport, Tennessee, and we moved to Kingsport, where things started to stabilize a little bit. But that same narrative of we pulled ourselves out of the trailer park by bootstraps and hard work and saving and all that kind of stuff, and then was able to move out, or I was able to get out of Kingsport, which was again kind of a rural area or smaller town that it was limited in some kind of employment options, but through joining the military and eventually taking an ROTC scholarship, I was able to go to college. And so there was this very much of hard work pays off. You can pull yourself out of poverty if you work hard enough, kind of thing.
Right. And so, any diversity in culture of when you grew up? I have to ask.
Yeah, no, and it's a good question, and so not really. At that point in time, it was, I would say, 90% of my interactions before we moved to Tennessee were with white folks. My mom was Italian, but by that time, her family still looked at themselves as part of the white community. So,
right.
Yeah, it was pretty much almost exclusively with other white people. There were a few interactions after I got playing sports in surrounding areas that I had a little bit of diversity, but not anything really to give much of a nod to on my daily life.
Okay.
Yeah.
And so the ROTC experience, it led you to, so you were a combat engineer. And
yeah.
What does a combat engineer do, and where were you stationed?
Yeah, so I think that's the kind of the other part of the first narrative was, I was really all about being an American. So there was this idea that to serve one country is meet and right, and that whatever America was doing was on par with what God wanted for the world, kind of thing.
Right.
And so, I was pretty gung ho. I joined the U.S. Air Force, got an engineering degree, and then came on active duty, I guess in June of 2001.
Okay.
And so, a few months later, lots of things changed.
Mm-hmm.
September 11th kind of rolled around, and I drank deeply again from the American civil religion, and volunteered to go to the Middle East and a number of different places, primarily building runways and bases.
Okay.
So I was a mechanical engineer by training, and cross-trained over to civil engineer so I could get out of the office, and ended up out in lots of really hot places, planning out how to put aircraft in places that most people don't think to put aircraft. And
okay.
And then all the support stuff that goes around with it.
So that's where your interaction, obviously, then is with a totally different culture. I mean, I'm just saying.
That's a reasonable statement. Yeah.
Yeah, so talk to us a little bit about that, because basically, you're helping to facilitate a war and
Hmm.
I don't think I always try to make sure I explain to people I love the United States of
Hmm.
America. I
Oh
am
yeah.
not in any way saying, I'm anti our government.
Sure.
But there is another narrative when you're there in another
Hmm.
country and you're interacting with another culture, which
Hmm.
I'm assuming for you that this was the first time that this had happened for you.
Yeah, by and large, it was. I had an aunt that was in the Peace Corps, and then we traveled to Costa Rica. But that was more tourism kind of thing than anything else.
Right.
Yeah. So this is really where working side by side with people, being in in another culture in ways that were beyond pleasantries or an exchange of food and that kind of thing. So. Yeah, I was stationed primarily out of Qatar or Qatar or however you want to say it. Never gotten that down.
Right.
Even living there for months on end, and had a really kind of sobering experience, both in the Muslim population that I worked with. So as an engineer, I spent a lot of time traveling around trying to secure either equipment or labor or materials that you just couldn't get over in time to build things. So I spent a lot of
Right.
time interacting with people in country and contractors from all over the world, and those interactions really kind of opened my eyes to just how complex our presence in the Middle East was.
Mm-hmm.
That I came setting people free and keeping America safe, and for some folks it was a chance to really capitalize and make some money. For some folks it was a chance to be able to further infrastructure in their country, and for some folks it was occupation and exploitation.
Right.
And I worked a lot with what were called third country nationals at the time. And these are people who are neither citizens of the country they are working in, nor citizens of the companies they work for. So as an example of that, I worked with American contractors in Bahrain or Qatar that worked for companies from Italy or America, but the labor themselves usually came from somewhere in Asia. So I worked with a lot of Nepali folks that
Okay.
were the labor. And yeah, to see how they got caught up in all of the comings and goings of a war was a really sobering experience. So particularly was the work conditions that they found themselves in,
Mm-hmm.
and how we, and I say we in a very kind of large sense, both as Americans, as supporters of American businesses and that kind of stuff, really had some kind of questionable practices in how we used that labor, and how they received it. So there was one point in time, where they weren't allowed to travel home. The living conditions were just
So they
really
were
kind of awful.
they were pretty much slave labor.
Yeah, I mean, it's about as close as you can get,
Right.
and still say that there's a payment, a transaction taking place. But that transaction was on the lower end, and sometimes they didn't have a whole lot of choice. Before our conversation, I went back and looked at it, at some of the stipulations for employing third country nationals, and there was once upon a time a practice where you could take their passport. They would surrender their
Wow.
passport, and so yeah, I mean we've gone back and corrected that, I think, since '06. But at the time there was a practice where you basically had them where they had no other place to go.
Okay. So And I love one of the examples you gave, but then that's partly because, I like some science fiction stuff, so
Oh,
you had
yeah.
provided a link in reference to Star Wars, so, the listeners just have to indulge us for a minute, because can you describe that as far as the
Sure.
Galactic Empire and the whole Star Wars reference,
Yeah. So I'd come back from serving with in the Middle East, and with a lot of questions, the things that I saw in the way that we were received by a number of different groups. We didn't always feel like the good guys, and a lot of the things that we didn't always, I didn't always feel like the good guy kind of stuff. And there was this silly little YouTube clip about a bunch of stormtroopers sitting around reminiscing about when the Death Star blew up, and where were you, and it had this intentional take on, where were you when the towers fell kind of thing. And
right.
Yeah, there was this, this kind of moment of awful realization that, I had always pictured myself growing up. And again, Luke Skywalker, the plucky little farm boy kind of stuff, going to, free the universe. And, there was that moment of like, oh man, I look a whole lot more like a stormtrooper occupying, someone's planet. And that put a whole lot of cracks in my narrative.
Okay. So I think this is going to be a good time for us to take a quick break. And if you can stay on the line, we'll pick up with your story when we come back. And just hold on, okay?
Yeah, sounds good.
Is made possible by a grant from Sentient Bean, offering fair trade coffee, vegan and vegetarian food, and breakfast all day. Located at 13 East Park Avenue, across the street from the tennis courts at Forsyth Park. Our menu and special events listings can be found at sentientbean.com.
WRUU is now collecting items for the annual Savannah Soundings fundraising auction. The auction will run from July 15th to July 30th, with proceeds going to WRUU to continue providing both great music and a voice for the Savannah community. Auction items range from gift cards to vouchers for products and services that are guaranteed to delight and surprise. Tell everyone you know about donating and about the auction. Donations can be made now. For information on donations, contact Trent Kissinger at takissinger@gmail.com. Again, that email address is T as in Trent, A as in Apple, Kissinger@gmail.com. So, Christian, are you still with us?
I am.
Okay, perfect. So, we've kind of gone through your narrative and how you came to that realization that you weren't actually the cowboy in the white hat. Doing good. And so after that, and I don't want to make it sound like, oh, well, that was it happened, and it wasn't without tension, it wasn't without stress, because I'm pretty sure it was probably pretty horrific.
Yeah.
To have that whole paradigm shift, to realize that, wait a minute, things are not as I thought them to be.
Yeah, and you hear about time in the wilderness, and something like that happens, and it's akin to scales kind of falling away from eyes, kind of stuff. And,
right.
I shortly thereafter, about a year and a half after taking a couple other positions in the military, ended up getting out, and for a solid year and a half, I kind of wandered across the country trying to make heads or tails of what was going on with identity and belief system, and a framework for interpreting how the world actually was. And so I was far from being like, oh, okay, got it. Now I'm gonna kind of change path and move on. It was a year and a half, at least, of trying to sort through anger and shame and guilt and a whole slew of emotions that were tough to process.
So from that, because I since I know you, I kind of know where you transitioned into.
Yeah.
So explain to me your next step, because I know you went to seminary.
Eventually, yeah.
Yeah. So, how long was that after wandering in the wilderness experience? Did you get to that point of realizing that was where, your next steps?
So it was about another year after that. So wandered for a while. Took up a job with my brother-in-law, who had a small company, and he was good enough to let me work with him and help me get by. And then I started taking night classes and started engaging in different churches, different social groups, and just tried to kind of feed that curiosity of, well, the old narrative doesn't work, and where other places can I find healthy narratives for things like reconciliation, unity, that give life to me and a community around me, and was kind of happy to find, for me, it was the Episcopal Church, the place where people of differing sexualities and cultures and belief systems were able to at least have a place to talk with one another and try to
safe.
make sense of things. Yeah, well, to be safe and to feel like a voice was heard.
Right.
And there was a space that was curated in the particular church I was at that I'm thankful for, where, questions and differing point of views were welcomed. And so it was such a positive experience that I thought, hey, maybe being a minister or at least a religious professor would be a way to work through, multiple points of views on truth and ways to come together and work towards a common good.
And so, what I think is interesting about this part of your narrative is that, it was a process, and it still is a process. It wasn't, and I think that's the frustration for most of us, because, let's be honest, we want the quick fix. We want, we're the fast food. We, if it takes too long, we're just very impatient. And, so kind of share, on this journey, what are some things that you do to help you stay intentional? Because, looking at it from, I know how easy it could be just to say, you know what, I'm not going to deal with it anymore. I'm a minister now. I've got my church. And, how do you keep moving through the reconciliation process, through the healing process? If you have some thoughts on that, as far as, I don't want to say any magic potion.
No. I think part of it is, there's an essence of real joy that comes with both the feeling of reconciliation and of further understanding. I can remember, I started to sort through post-colonial narratives and the imperial stuff. And then, I interned with a group in Nashville that was working with women of the street, so women who were trafficked in the sex industry, and to sit down with them and to hear their take on Scripture. And for me, it was always that kind of different layers of the Holy Spirit are revealed from all these different points of view. And so to hear their take on Mary Magdalene, or to hear a person who had been under colonial rule talk about what the Demon Legion was about for them, or to read something maybe on race relationships. So, people like James Cone and Albert Rabbitoe, who said, hey, America was not the New Jerusalem, it was the New Egypt. for a lot of not a lot of them, for everyone that was forced to come here from Africa. And so being able to have those type of epiphanies kind of brought to the fore, and then to say, okay, so we share these same scriptures, they unite us. How can they help us, reconcile some of these atrocities that, particularly our nation and different parts of our ethnocentric cultures are part of, including, the ones that I'm still part of.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. From, you think you're like, oh, I got over this post-colonial thing. And you don't. There's another neo-colonialization, but it's that continual work and the friendships that you make in it, and the deeper understanding that everybody comes to. It's, for me, seeing the difference between working towards a singular goal for a singular point of view, which a lot of the times was what I did in the military. It was mission first. It was a clearly defined mission,
right.
And to a place where I could find multiple values and to bring all those values to bear for what was most of the times a life-giving solution that didn't play out of scarcity. And being part of that was really hopeful and really life-giving for me.
Yeah. So, I think what would be, because I think that's, the whole process of getting to where you are now and working through, all of the different levels, especially with the current, with the current, current events is, I guess, the best way that I can say it. What kind of words do you give to your parishioners when you're talking to them to give them hope? Because I know there are days, for me, I have to always kind of just really on the days that are or can be very dim and seem to be very bleak, it's like, well, what do we have to be hopeful about? And it's like, yes, I want to constantly be open to the experience and learning about other cultures, but how do you continuously feed into the rejuvenation and the hope that, how do we continue to move forward into becoming one human nation?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So, the hope we have is, so much grounded in our vision for what the fullness of God's creation looks like. That picture of the kingdom of God, whether it's from Micah or from Isaiah, all these people gathering around God's holy mountain, and of, races and creeds and different views and that kind of stuff. That at the end of all things, that is what God is longing for. But and some days in the despair, it's that that Jobian kind of thing that I don't understand.
Right.
I don't. Some of the current events of another African American is shot with his back turned or her back away, or another group has been made the new pariahs of society. And sometimes we don't have any answer other than to go and sit with those people too. And
yes.
Yeah, that sitting, that presence, that being with, not from a distance, but actually there. And that's hard, but almost every time we bring some people together, there is there's a smile or a joy or something that is shared. But sometimes you just got to sit with it and sit with those in it.
Right. Well, I think that has been most of our show.
Wow.
Yeah, I know the time is actually moving on, and as I sit here and look through our notes of some of the things that we that we talked about, I do want to touch base on, because you've talked about things more from a Christian point of view, and I know there may be people listening that don't have any religious doctrine, or they may be Buddhist, or they may be something totally different than Christian. I mean, how do you reconcile that?
So it was funny. Part of my my wanderings brought me through Buddhism, particularly Tibetan Buddhism. I spent some time in Nepal, so I'd been part of kind of the exploitation of Nepali folks, and then found a whole lot of healing sitting with them years later, and that same kind of underlying need for compassion. I think even as a priest, I think I can say with some sense of clarity that the Buddhists do compassion really well, and I think there are a number of humanist movements that do compassion really well. And so this idea of sitting, of sharing, of burdens, that type of thing, oriented towards human healing and flourishing. We have different expressions for it in the Christian background and in the Buddhist ideas of compassion and no self. But I think just about everybody is for health and wholeness and flourishing. And so, we can get on board with these types of visions where, everyone has a chance to flourish.
Well, on that note, I think that's a very, very positive note.
I hope so. Yeah,
it is. I think it's been awesome. You've given me some things to think about, and I made some notes. I hope our listeners, of course, some of them are driving, so you can't be making notes if you're driving, people. So let's be safe out there. But I've definitely made some notes, and I'm sure our listeners have gotten a different perspective as we continue to explore in a safe, honest, open, and hopefully productive dialogue, how we can continue to move through being, part of an ethnocentric culture to being more ethno-relative, to being, and it is going to be a process that we all have to figure out how we're going to get through the reconciliation to get to the healing so we can get to justice. So, Christian, thank you so much for joining us. And
thank you, Sandy. And thanks for putting all this stuff together. We're still enjoying One Human Race here, and it's just amazing. It sounds like the stuff that you're doing in Savannah. So thank you.
Well, thank you. And, keep making your notes, because we probably will ask you back to be on our show at a later time.
All right. Sounds great, Sandy.
All righty. Take care.
Peace be with you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
And you're listening to WRUU-LP Savannah, Georgia, 107.5 FM, WRUU.org. We are Savannah Soundings, community radio with global soul. So if you've been listening in, hopefully you've gotten some insights or some aha moments or some things that you're just maybe scratching your head over, and you're like, I'm still struggling. I'm still not quite sure, how this all is playing out. And I think one of the takeaways that I'm taking away from the conversation with Christian is, we can't just wait till we all figure it out. We do. We want answers. We want solutions. We want somebody to say that if you do A plus B, you're always going to get C, and 2 plus 2 is always going to equal 4, because that's how our mind works. We want to process it so that it's logical, so that it sounds reasonable in the reality, because of our human nature and what we historically have done over the ages, and unfortunately continue to do. It's a very it's hard to get your head around. So I want to share something with you, because I'm reading this book, and as I think through the next upcoming week, I want to share this thought with you, and hopefully it's something that you can take away into your week, as well as start thinking in terms of what does this mean for the United States. And it's a book that I'm reading. It's entitled Post-Traumatic Slave Syndrome. And it's very interesting. The person that wrote it, Dr. Joy DeGruy, and I hope I'm saying her name right. And one of the things that caught my eye right off the top is one of the stories she's sharing about the Maasai warriors in Africa. And she's talking about how they always greet each other. Because, when we see each other, we typically speak, but we don't say anything of substance the way they say of substance. And their greeting, and I'm not going to even try to say what it is in their language, but their greeting, it means, "And how are the children?" And the acknowledgement when you're greeted that way, whether you have children or not, the traditional answer that they give is, "All the children are well." And to me, that says a lot. And as I think about our culture and what's going on in our country, and looking at what's happened in our school systems and acclimating back into being into Savannah, when I talk to a lot of people about what has changed in Savannah and what's different, I'm loving it. But I'm now picking up on some of the concerns and what's happened with the public school systems and some of the areas that are dealing with more crime. I'm asking myself, well, can we truly say that the children are well, that all of the children are well? And it seems to me somewhere in there, in how they translate this, that means that life is good, that if all the children are well, no matter what their economic status, then life is good. And it seems if we can get to that point in this country of starting to look at how can we shift our culture, because that also seems to be the point of contention for other people when they move here. They're not used to the United States culture. And when you go to check out in a store, typically the question they're asking you is, well, did you find everything you needed? And frankly, if I'm checking out and I didn't find everything that I needed, I probably should have, found that out a little bit earlier. But that's the questions that we ask ourselves. I'm wondering how we can get to more substance and start really looking at, are all the children well? Because I think that speaks to part of what's going to need to happen for us to move towards one human nation and get past the biases that we have, especially the unconscious bias as it relates to religion, as it relates to this thing we've created called race, and all of the other ways that we try to put people into buckets. Thanks for listening. We're coming up to the end of today's show, so I do want to remind you to make sure that you check out information that's posted at the website, and that website is www.onehumannation.info. If you would like to contact me, the best way to reach me is via email, and that's mystory@onehumannation.info. Next week's show would be on Thursdays, same time, 5 p.m. Eastern Daylight Time, and it's 1 hour, and we'll be talking about race reconciliation. We're going to be talking more about this whole concept of ethnocentric and how do we start looking at gapping cultures. And we're coming up on a holiday, the 4th of July. And so that's kind of another opportunity. If you talk to people from different cultures, get a take on, what are they taking away from celebrating this holiday? because is it the same as what you're thinking if you're coming from an ethnocentric point of view? Because it means different things to different people. And it's interesting when I start seeing some of the interactions on Facebook of thinking, coming up to this particular holiday of the 4th of July, it's clear that people do love their country in most instances. I say that in most instances, but there is a difference and a disconnect on what does it mean to celebrate the 4th of July if you're a person of color. So once again, thank you for listening to the One Human Nation show. I'm your host, Sandy Batiste. And next up is going to be the sounds of Troy Stoner with Sound Limit. And actually, I should probably say it's going to be Sound Limit. I don't know if there's going to be another host for Troy, but Sound Limit will be coming up next, and you'll be listening to the sounds of Joe Morales as we get ready for the top of the hour.